You're going to end up looking like Seattle, and if that's what you want, stay home, because literally I fought that fight for 20 years trying to get them out of the pews and into the voter booths, and only 25% of the Christians in Washington state, which is half conservative, half progressive, let's just say, or worse, even registered. 25%. Imagine if we had doubled that to 50% just to say they would have changed the trajectory of everything and they wouldn't be cutting off their children's genitals now. So the answer is, if that's what you want, stay home.
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew and Shawn.
And I'm Shawn Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we're thankful you're listening to this show. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God. So please don't hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. You can reach me directly by emailing Matthew at tnchristian.com.
Or Shawn, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com.
And you can follow me on X at MNBookman. Today's show is sponsored in the West Tennessee area by the #1 lawn care company in the Mid-South, Herbie Systems. Without enough nutrients, your lawn becomes more susceptible to diseases and pests. To effectively keep away weeds from your lawn, trust the experts at Herbie Systems. Call 901-290-7774 today and let them kill your weeds. Our scripture is from Proverbs, the 28th chapter, verses 11 through 15. When the righteous rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked arise, men hide themselves. He who covers his sins will not prosper, but whoever confesses and forsakes them will have mercy. Happy is the man who is always reverent, but he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity. Like a roaring lion and a charging bear is a wicked ruler over poor people. Listeners, over the years, you have heard how Shawn and I have been disappointed by politicians. Stop. End. Stop. Flat out. Just about all of them. Really just too many times to count. But the current special election in the 7th District of Tennessee is one of the greatest disappointments I've had since I started Conservative Christians of Tennessee 6 years ago. We wanted this position to be vacated, but we had hoped it would be because the man holding the seat, and that's Mark Green, we wanted him to be our next governor at one point. We had great hope for him to stand up and be a great leader for our state. In 2022, we started telling him we wanted him to run for governor, but last year he disappointed us, and all that changed. Mark Green had an affair. He fornicated with a younger woman, abandoned his family, left his wife. That's a grievous sin. Please understand that appointment, though, is not over just one congressional seat. It's about much more. It's about what could have been for our state. And now in 2025, we place a completely different slate of candidates for governor. There's a wild special election race shaping up with dozens of Republicans vying for a vacated seat. You've heard some of these candidates discussed on our show before. We brought you almost 2 hours of Jody Barrett as he talked with us through several episodes and explained all the dirty tricks the political establishment used against him in the last session. We've spoken favorably of Gino Bolsel's assistance with pro-life legislation. So hear me when I say I'm not disappointed with the men who have stepped up to run for this office, but the election itself is a black eye on the state of Tennessee because a man broke his oath to his family, an oath he made before God. He could have put our state on a true conservative direction, but due to bad, sinful, wicked decisions, we now have a season of chaos that will remake our entire legislature and reshape the governor's race. Today, we're going to talk about the candidates filling this void, but it's impossible to look past the failure that got us here. We're glad to have today's guest with us to help us look at these issues in this special election, but an honest assessment of this race could not start without acknowledging the sin that brought us to this moment. Stephen M. Abramowicz may have grown up on the left coast, but he's one of the many transplants we're happy to have welcomed into the great state of Tennessee. Stephen is a graduate of the University of Southern California and a writer who is recognized for his quality conservative political analysis. His wealth of knowledge, contributing to discussions on current events and great interviews with newsmakers of the day, makes us happy that Stephen came to Middle Tennessee from Washington State in 2024. Back in 2022, Stephen had taken over the Heartland Journal, formerly known as Mill Creek View. And now he uses the platform to continue to producing online interviews and articles that touch on the foundational issues of politics and culture. Stephen, it is a pleasure to finally welcome you to Faith in Action.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's a pleasure. Actually, 3 years ago, last Saturday, I drove into Tennessee for the first time and been here ever since. 3 years. So thanks for having me.
Congrats.
Wow. Well, happy 3-year anniversary.
It's a 10-year town. I got 7 to go, but here we are.
We love to introduce new guests to our audience. Shawn was impressed the first time that you met, but tell us a little bit about what you got into news and writing, and just kind of relate that to your overall Christian testimony for us.
Well, it's a long story. I can basically just tell you that having two kids changed my life and stopped me from being an idol worshiper and family man. My kids were found by Jesus before I was, and I have strong beliefs that he did it for me to also find me. And there we are. So my daughter and I got baptized at the same time. And so the whole family raised in the Jewish tradition from my parents, who one came from Eastern Europe and died very young, 1977. And so I was left to my own devices to figure it all out. So I took the scenic route, as they say, and blessed to have found not only Jesus at the same time as finding Tennessee. So really baptism by country, and happy to be here today with you.
So did you guys get baptized in Tennessee?
No, Washington State.
Okay.
I call it behind the Emerald Curtain, den of iniquity. The Satan's throne is in Seattle. So I got to see a lot of things. My tagline was, do not California, do not Washington State or Tennessee. I was telling the legislatures, don't pass rules and regulations and laws like they did, because of the slippery slope that will lead to something you don't really want in a red state. Yeah. But sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't.
Thank you for bringing up the slippery slope. One of our shticks here is that every psychology class, every philosophy class that the freshman level and every college for the last 40 years has taught people that the slippery slope is a logical fallacy. And it's not.
Well, everybody's favorite Democrat in Nashville, Justin Jones, went to divinity school at Vanderbilt. So, there's the slippery slope right there.
Exactly. You have an article on Heartland Journal, y'all's website, where you're talking about judges, but I think it related as we talk about electing federal leaders as well. And a quote from it is, the founding fathers, having fought a revolution against concentrated and unaccountable power, would be deeply troubled by the current state of the American judiciary. The ability of unelected, lifetime appointed by hyper-partisan politicians as lower court judges to issue rulings with national impact, often overriding the will of elected representatives, represents a form of judicial supremacy that surpasses the powers of King George III. Do you see this turnover of Mark Green's seat to a field of a dozen hopefuls as something the founders would like or dislike?
Oh, they'd hate it. I have a companion piece that came out Friday called The Doctrine of Lesser Magistrate, which literally says that the sheriff is more powerful than the president on a lot of cases. So when you're talking about what could be more partisan than a local congressional race, last night at this event, there were 4 candidates on there, 3 of which were lawyers, all from different walks of life of lawyerism. And they're Republicans, no question about it, but they are not what the founding fathers have had, because they didn't even want parties, if you remember your history books, which they don't teach anymore. Even if they were teaching it, they're not learning it. So yes, absolutely. The judges who are lifetime appointments are exactly what the entire point of the American Revolution was to get away from King George, king, divine right of kings. Just like in the Bible, judges, once those were done, I think the last line of the Bible that literally talks about judges is they acted any which way they wanted. There was no one to judge or to tell them what to do. They demanded a king. Long story short, we have a society, America, a 2-party system where no, I do not think the founders had that in their intention, because it has gone way off the rails. I think there are 17 responsibilities of a congressperson in the Constitution, Article 1. And we obviously do a lot more than that back there in DC. So they've already gone off the guardrails a long time ago, and we get to live with it, and our grandkids get to live with it. We can get into it. We can get down to the grassroots level if you want, or we can talk 30,000 feet, whatever is on your mind.
Sure. I think this is interesting that we're having this discussion about the responsibilities of candidates right now. Monty Fritz just declared his candidacy for the governor race. And this is another one of those things that's opened up because of this vacation of the seat. Vacating this seat changes a whole lot of position, caused some very principled men to stand up and say, if I'm elected as governor, if I'm elected to the federal position, these are the things I want to do. That seems like an interesting shift. It sounds like the candidates that are picking up and entering these races, they're actually having to talk about fundamental principles for why they're in the job. Am I right?
You're right. I mean, I remember very clearly when Newt Gingrich made the Congress that he first became Speaker of read the Constitution. And it was very eye-opening because it seemed as if they never had before. Here, this is the Republican-led state for the last 14 years or so after a really long time of Democrats. And Jack Johnson's been on my show a couple times, and he tells me the reason why there are 2,000 bills every session is like maybe 1,000 of them are undoing ills from the past, right? So they waste a lot of time just trying to right the ship, and then they can get into all the progressive stuff that we don't like that a Republican shouldn't be doing anyway. It's a special election. Let's remember that, to fill the vacant seat of Mark Green, who resigned on July 2025. And this was a big deal. It was like shuffling the decks on the Titanic, because this was Marsha Blackburn's seat, D7. By the way, so Tennessee's next possible governor certainly is interested in her old district. The current governor, Lee's, is his district too. So if and when those two make an endorsement, things are going to change in terms of whatever these polls are. So last night, AFP-TN, which is Tennessee, and Matt Murphy show had a non-debate debate, I'm calling it, because they called it a debate in Nashville for the special election. So as of September 6, 2025, there has been 8 special elections that have been called for the 119th Congress, the one that's kind of going on right now, that we're trying to fix. So from the 113th to the 118th, there's only ever been 80 special elections. So 10% of them right now this year, thank you, Dr. Green, didn't have to do that. But here's the key, not just because it's my district, but I think the record for any of these is a board of supervisors earlier this year came in at $6.6 million in San Diego. Just 2 years earlier, they replaced a county supervisor for $4.8 million. So over $11 million for county supervisor. That is completely nuts. So you ask about the founders? No, they wouldn't want that much money spent on this. So this is a U.S. Congress seat we're talking about now. So the stakes are much, much higher. And the country is watching. Williamson County, Tennessee, is a very important county in America for politics. And Democrats think it's flippable, believe it or not. And Republicans may very well be helping them out intentionally or unintentionally. We'll see.
Listeners, our entire conversation is going to be on the special election of District 7. This special election will reset in District 7, and so many of you listeners in the Nashville, all that area around, you guys are here. This is talking directly to you. You're in an election season, and you don't probably know it. And so we want to bring this conversation to you so that you see it's time to vote already. Early voting starts, I believe, in 10 days. So guys, it's election season. It's time to get up on the candidates. So Matthew and I wanted to bring Steve in today because he's an expert. Tell our listeners how many people are in this race.
There are already rules in place making grassroots folks very mad. You need a bona fide Republican. Right. You had to have voted in 3 of the last 4 Republican primaries to run. So just the field itself was made small as possible. As of today, there are 4 independents, 4 Democrats, including Tennessee's AOC, they call her, yes. Afton Ben, the radical activist, and 11 bona fide Republicans. But here's the thing about that. 19 are on the ballot. In 2018 was Mark's first term. 254,000 voted, and he got 67% of the vote. 67% is a landslide. So Mark was very popular. And remember, 2018 was a midterm, Trump's first term. So MAGA was at its peak with all the Russia hysteria and pre-COVID. Okay, so 2020, re-election, Trump's on the ballot against Biden and all that insanity. And Mark wins 70%. Better. Landslide against Democrat, 245,000 votes to Kiran Sripada, Democrat, less than 100,000. So, 95,000 to be exact. Fast forward to the midterms, Tennessee has a low turnout tradition as well as apathy, and Mark only gets 60% against Odessa Kelly, who got 38%. Still a landslide, but only 39,000 votes separated them. All that to be said, if next month is low turnout, like Mark's 2022, 180,000, and there are 11 Republicans, you just need 17,000 votes to win.
That's amazing to me because we're talking about such small numbers when you have it subdivided. They've cut the pie in so many ways here.
Classic split the vote.
Take one candidate like Jody or Gino. Their total vote for their House seat, they were bringing in 25 or 24,000 votes total in their general election for that. I think we're probably going to be
worse than that, Shawn. I did the numbers. Gino won his reelection with 25,000 votes versus 15,000 for Democrat Claire Jones. He did get 62%, but Jody won 78%, which is a lot more, but with 12,500 to Candy Larita Hedges, 20%, 3,200. So again, these counties are very small. It doesn't take a lot to win. So if you spread it so thin, like I just pointed out, you could have a U.S. Congress seat for as little as 17,000 votes.
Yeah,
that's wild. We're worried somewhat that Christians may stay home because they're disillusioned. You know, Mark Green had that affair. We have a lot of listeners who engage with the show who are politically minded. They think from a Christian worldview. And if I'm as disappointed as I am, I know they're disappointed. What would you say to them if they're considering staying home and just not voting in this election because Mark hurt them?
I'll say you're going to end up looking like Seattle. And if that's what you want, stay home, because literally I fought that fight for 20 years trying to get them out of the pews and into the voter booths. And only 25% of the Christians in Washington state, which is half conservative, half progressive, let's just say, or worse, even registered. 25%. Imagine if we had doubled that to 50% just to say they would have changed the trajectory of everything and they wouldn't be cutting off their children's genitals now. So the answer is, if that's what you want, stay home. Gino is a very devout Catholic, at least the way I perceive it. And Jody is very, at least he speaks on it, very Christian. But last night at the forum, nobody talked about it at all. They did do the Pledge of Allegiance and they did say under God at the end. But, you know, even with Pamela Furr now working at AFP, who everything I've ever gone to in the 3 years where she's there, she would sing God Bless America to open it. They didn't do it. So I don't know if that's a sign of the times or if now that's the AFP influence, you know, taking over the party. But it certainly wasn't a religious experience like I've seen in the past talking about politics. So they will stay home, even after all we've been through between the COVID mandates and the closing of the churches and closing of the gyms and, you know, kids learning the wrong things in school and Bible in or out of the city square. The answer is you're going to look like Seattle if you don't wake up and vote your conscience on this stuff. And that's why probably if you look at the top four who were there, all faithful family men believers, but they certainly didn't talk about it.
We've had Jody on the show before, and we heard his Christian testimony at the start. I think people in his district know about his strong Christian testimony.
I absolutely believe that there is a strong faith contingent there. But, you know, when you talk about the voters, does that even move them anymore? Do they care? I mean, ever since John F. Kennedy, you know, kind of beat back the whole anti-Catholic thing of the whole country. And then we had Joe Biden, probably the worst ever, and a Catholic. No one really cares about that anymore because they either get proven to be like Mark, not really walking the walk. I don't know. It's a conundrum.
We used to send out a candidate survey, and one of the questions that we would ask candidates is if they would submit to church discipline. So in other words, if they were a Mark Green and they had an affair, you know, would you submit to church discipline? But sadly, so few churches participate in a discipline.
Well, you know, we do have a problem, in my humble opinion, and that's because the leader of the ticket is very wishy-washy when it comes to faith. You have the Speaker of the House is a very devout Christian, but yet go look at the fine print of the big, beautiful bill, and it's pretty ugly. So we have to remember that DC is not the Vatican. DC is not a church. It is a bunch of people, all sinners, all flawed. Mark Green's the rule, not the exception, to be quite honest. So you could have a U.S. congressperson from the richest county in Tennessee sent there with just 9% of the vote if people stay home. And if the Dems turn out, for no offense to Stuart Park, but here's an example. And he's been on my show, love him, you know, about his time in January 6th, but AFPTN has him at 0.8%. So think 10,000 Democrats would like to see him have to run against Afton. Yes, they would. So could a Dem win the general? Not just any Dem, but Tennessee's AOC with all the out-of-state money. She'd suck up, you know, next door to Blue Nashville. Yes.
You're not the only political analyst who we've had say these things. We've had some other out-of-district folks. The gentleman who ran Marjorie Taylor Greene's campaign shared virtually the identical thought. Christians have an obligation to seriously consider these candidates, to vote, and to bring, you know, your pastor might have had an auto dialer 20 years ago that said, you know, bring your friend in the Bible on Sunday morning. Bring a friend to vote and have a good conversation with them on the way to the polling place.
Well, I'm a 10 and 10 type of guy. You got to get 10 calls and 10 people to go with you. And here's where I was mentioning earlier, if I may, the Republicans may have done this to themselves. I don't understand why, and no politician has been on my show to explain why open primaries now look like a big problem, even though Republicans seem to think it's good for democracy, but it's really good for capital D Democrats to pick their weakest opponent. I saw this way back when in California with Gray Davis as governor, who picked his earliest opponent that he knew he could beat. Sure enough, he did win the general, but a year later they recalled him for a little thing like raising price of car tabs. So just imagine what they do if they were mad about something like, gun rights or vaccine mandates here in Tennessee, right? So Mark won the general just 9 months ago with his lowest percent, 59%. I went through everything that led up to that versus Megan Barry, less than 69,000 votes. A lot of Dems have moved here since last year. So could they find another 70,000 votes? We're about to see. But the moves the Republicans have made, doing away with caucuses, attacking the Republican Party chairman, picking their favorite candidates, treating Jody Barrett the way they did in committees like education to get the controversial voucher bill passed, and open primaries could be a recipe to give the Dems back the majority that they have been out of power for 12 years, but they had it for 150 before.
Yeah, there are a lot less reasons to be loyal as a Republican. Our budget is up almost 60%, over 10 years ago.
100%.
Well, far surpasses inflation. It far surpasses the population increase. It's just out of control. And I think that is going to be Bill Lee's legacy. He's ended the justifications that many folks have to be loyal to the Republican Party. He's led this party. Really, they're more dominant than ever, but they do not understand how close they are to disaster.
Well, he's a corporatist, number one. He does run one of the biggest HVAC companies in the state, and he certainly gave great deals to Ford, no bid contract to Elon to dig a tunnel underneath Nashville to the airport, and the list goes on. And one thing that I've observed in Tennessee is that Gino is actually the only true practicing lawyer in the entire assembly. The rest of them have law degrees, but they don't practice that kind of law. And so they don't often know what they're talking about, to be honest with you. So if they're looking at something like fluoride in our water, they're going to listen to the dental lobby more than they're going to listen to the law that the Supreme Court passed in California saying, don't do that anymore. Though I had to grow up with it, even if the science says it's going to knock 2 to 3 points of IQ off your children. Not to say that they're dumb, they're brilliant, but they have an issue here where they're not looking at it in terms of what their voters demand. They look more to what the leadership is telling them to do. And I think I hear a lot of grumblings. People are very disappointed with leadership.
Yeah.
When you think about it, Jody, Reeves, and Gino are 3 Republican assemblymen working in the environment I just described under Lee, Sexton, and McNally. Well, the voters are sort of like, maybe we're better off throwing them up to DC and they won't bother us here in Nashville anymore. But the alternative is very interesting because who's going to take their seats? That we don't even know. So
who is the best man for this position, in your opinion?
Even though I hear the grumblings about Gino lives in D5 and not D7, which in Tennessee is actually legal, I learned. I think if Brentwood, which is where he lives, turns out for him, he can certainly draw the numbers, and any Republican should be able to beat the Democrat in a general in Middle Tennessee. So that's his best path. Jody needs the Reagan, Goldwater, conservative, purist MAGA vote. And in East Tennessee, like Tim Burchett, he'd have it easy here. So we're about to find out, but I don't think the numbers that know him best in Dixon, where he went to high school, can outvote the Brentwood folks if they go that way. So I think, just not my opinion, not who I'd vote for, but what I think, Van Epst, he's a first-time candidate. I don't think so. I think the tie goes to Gino.
That's fair analysis.
He's a constitutional conservative, so he actually knows the job. I don't mind that.
And I think that's 2 good guys that in a normal election, we'd be happy that either one of them was in the race.
And there's this new thing online called TN Report Card. And so you can see Jody D69 is 100%, the only 100%er ever. And Gino is at 8. Both get 5 stars. And he and Jody made the A-listers. So either one would be fine with me. Let's put it that way. But I'm just looking at the numbers. And I think the district that Gino represents has more firepower than the one that Jody does. And you know what? I think that's great because I really want Jody to go back to Nashville and fight the good fight for us because he's the only one that does.
Tell our listeners more about your show and where they can hear it.
I love it when people go to heartlandjournal.com. Every news from the Heartland, so the stuff that Fox and NBC and CNN won't show you. And then every podcast we put out also goes there into the library, but you can catch it on our Rumble channel or our YouTube channel or our Spotify channel or any of the places you like to get your podcasts. We are there 2 to 3 times a week.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for another episode of Faith in Action. Again, make sure to go to heartlandjournal.com. If you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to over 5 years of past shows. You can search for Faith in Action also on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube. Anywhere you find us, you can hear a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and all the Mid-South region. And remember, until next week, our favorite promise from the book of Exodus, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. Amen.